Thank you for joining Taft Communications and our partner, the New Jersey Business and Industry Association, for what we've planned to be an engaging and insightful conversation on communicating to promote racial equity in the workplace. My name is Sheila Court, and my firm, Taft, is a communications consultancy focused on purpose and impact. At the company, I serve several roles, one of which is leading our Taft ClearPoint practice, where we focus on what we call the constant conversation, which is, can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
My apologies, my screen went kind of wonky. I think I was talking about our constant conversation, which is the many ways that leaders and aspiring leaders use communications to do their jobs better. I've spent my career in corporate communications working at major PR firms and several organizations, where I also managed and led diversity and inclusion efforts, including a stint at Diversity, Inc. Joining me today are three terrific panelists. Rena Desai is Director of Financial Planning and Analysis at Panasonic North America and has over 15 years of experience in driving business results, transforming finance organizations, processes, change management, and serving as a people leader. She is an avid supporter of spreading awareness of DE&I and currently serves as Vice Chair of the NJBIA D&I Council. Allison Banks-Moore is Chief Diversity Officer at Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield of New Jersey. Allison has over 35 years of experience as a human resource professional working at a variety of major corporations, including AT&T, KPMG, and Cablevision. At Horizon, Allison has harnessed the energy of a dynamic organization to strengthen the personal and professional relationships that support an inclusive, thriving, and diverse workplace. And Ryan Haygood, President and CEO of the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice. Ryan is a nationally respected civil rights lawyer who previously served as Deputy Director of Litigation at the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund. At NJISJ, Ryan leads a majority women of color team of racial justice advocates whose cutting-edge work seeks to build reparative systems that create wealth, justice, and power for Black, Latina, Latino, and other people of color in New Jersey. And also joining me today, our survey partner, Michelle Sakurka. Michelle serves as President and CEO at New Jersey Business and Industry Association, an organization dedicated to helping to advance the competitive excellence and financial success of its members in order to build a more prosperous New Jersey. Welcome, Michelle. Would you like to share a few words with us?
Oh, absolutely. Good morning, everyone. It's such a pleasure to join you today to be a partner with Taft in presenting this very, very critical and important discussion. We know that New Jersey businesses are leaning in big time on the issues of social equity and justice right now. We don't just see it in words, we're actually seeing it in actions, which is actually very compelling and exciting, but at the same time, very challenging for New Jersey business. And, the things we've learned that Sheila's going to share with us in your overview of the survey, we see that New Jersey businesses are all across the spectrum. We have businesses who are new to this game, not because they were ignoring these issues before, but because they just weren't up on best practices or what they should be paying attention to, or the reality is their workforce just wasn't so diverse that it really wasn't an issue in their mind. These are the practicalities, and we say to these businesses, you know what, thank you for stepping up and stepping in. Be transparent about your desire and ability to learn and be engaged and involved. And today's discussion is going to help all of our executive leaders, all of our managers, middle level, senior, and our frontline folks in order to have good discourse around these social equity issues. So it truly is our pleasure to join you today, Sheila.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Michelle, and thank you to all of you for joining us today. Now, before we begin our conversation, I'd like to set the stage with some findings from our recent and 5th annual State of Diversity Survey. Taft Communications, in conjunction with NJBIA and through Fairleigh Dickinson University's FDU poll, fielded the poll this summer to gain statewide insights into the day-to-day reality of public attitudes toward diversity in the workplace. This year's poll provided a mixed bag of findings about the state of diversity. among New Jersey employers. Just to summarize briefly, what we found was a backsliding on racial, ethnic, and gender respectfulness in the workplace. Most notably, that there are higher rates of people who, at least occasionally, are hearing that what could be considered offensive or racial to ethnic minorities and to women. And nearly 50% of all non-white respondents said they have personally felt discrimination often or occasionally, compared to 31% of whites. On a more encouraging note though, younger respondents, those who are 18 to 35, are more tuned into examples of offensive language or discrimination, signaling that new members of the workforce might have a higher degree of sensitivity to issues of equity and inclusion. And that's a good thing. You know, there are many findings and crosstabs in our survey that will provide a deeper insight. So I encourage all of you who are tuning in today to check out the survey online. You can find it at taftcommunications.com/diversity. And at the site, you'll also have access to the 4 prior surveys that we've given over the past years. Finally, at the conclusion of our panel discussion, there will be an opportunity to address some of your questions. At any time during this webinar, feel free to submit your question via the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So with that, I'd like to turn to Michelle to get us started with our first question to the panel.
Great, thanks so much, Sheila. You know, you've talked about, or we heard and you explained to us that the survey shows some backsliding on racial, ethnic, and gender respectfulness in the workplace. You know, in light of that, I want to know if we're seeing any promising new approaches in workplace diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts aimed at a more vigorous pushback against systemic racism. Rena, would you like to get us started with some insights on this?
Yeah, Michelle, no, that's a great question. And one of the most important things to realize is that there has been a shift in DE&I. It's a new way of thinking. And now more than ever, innovation and communication go hand in hand with DE&I initiatives. Some organizations are making bold moves. Take a look at Starbucks. After a racial incident at one of their cafes, they shut down completely for one day, costing them $1 million. Others are innovating, through their current initiatives. At Panasonic, we have completely revived DE&I, using multiple strategies focused on communication, education, and continuous listening. Leadership communicated their stance on racial equity and frequently provides communications around DE&I. So employees see their constant commitment. We relaunched all our ERGs, and all those ERG leaders now sit on an employee council that has a seat at the table with the executives and really can represent the underrepresented. And lastly, we engage with an external management company to ensure our talent practices are anti-bias, as well as continue to educate our leaders and employees.
Wow, Rena, all very commendable. And you said something really important there, having a seat at the table, so critical. In a lot of organizations, those EBRG groups are separate and apart. Bringing them to the table is a critical step. Allison, one thing we hear is that leaders and managers often struggle to find the right language. In other words, like what to say, what's appropriate and what's not, when it comes to speaking about diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. In your experience, do you see this as a stumbling block to moving towards changing attitudes and making diversity and inclusion programs more effective?
First and foremost, thank you for having me today. It can be a stumbling block. People are very cautious about what they should say and what they shouldn't say. In many instances, I have heard comments such as, I don't know what to say, so I don't say anything. But the perception of that is, by not saying anything, what does that really mean? Are you complicit? Do you not feel anything as a result of all of what's been going on? And some of the counsel that I give is that, if you have a friend, a coworker who has an ill parent or a relative or someone has passed away, and you would go to them and you would say, I just want to let you know, I'm thinking about you, I care about you, And if you want to talk, I'm here for you. Well, what's the difference? There is no difference. It's the same thing. The recipients of all of the social injustices that are going on right now are hurting. So you may not be able to empathize with what they're going through, but you can reach out to them and you can say to them, I'm thinking about you. I care about you. If you want to talk, I'm here to listen. And that's really very important. That's the first connector. That would eliminate that stumbling block. You're just being human. You're talking from the heart. It's just human to human interaction. That's what it basically boils down to. You know, change is a journey. You know, it's not a sprint. This is going to take some time. And anyone that thinks that this will happen overnight is sadly mistaken. We've been experiencing this over decades and decades, but we're at a tipping point now. So why not take advantage of that so we can leverage that and really do some good out of it? Because there's a lot that we can do. We can turn all of this around if we start talking to one another and begin that dialogue, but not to just check a box and say we've had the conversation. It's got to be ongoing. This is something that has to be sustainable.
Yeah, you bring up a lot of excellent points there, Allison. You know, this year, the world has learned the term allyship, right? Many allies have said and been very vocal about, well, we want to help, we want to say something, we just don't know what to say.
Right.
So your points are well taken, and it's a responsibility, I guess, of all of us to kind of support and help along the way. So, you know, we're in this journey together.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you. Ryan, working for a nonprofit, what's the role of organizations like the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice in holding people and organizations accountable?
Yeah, Sheila, thank you so much for the question. Thank you and Taft for hosting this conversation. I love your frame that we should aspire to have constant conversations, that we should be in conversations like these. And as Allison mentioned, even those uncomfortable conversations. And so as you shared, I lead the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice. We're a legal advocacy organization, and our mission really is to identify and topple what we think of as sort of structural load-bearing walls of racial inequality that, when knocked down, open up opportunities for people of color in particular in the areas of economic justice, in the areas of criminal justice reform, in the areas of democracy and justice. So, you know, we do this work really boldly by advocating as truth tellers. You know, we think a lot, you know, I've been reading and rereading, and I encourage viewers to read Dr. King's last book, you know, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community. He wrote this book, folks know, the year before his assassination. He stole away for 10 months, and he was by himself writing this book, and he wrote it in 1967. And this was at a point in history where the Civil Rights Act was passed, the Voting Rights Act was passed. The Voting Rights Act, as folks know, led within one generation of its passage to the election of the first Black president, right? So these major seismic shifts in federal legislation had happened, had changed the demographics and the complexions of our country, literally. And yet he still endeavors to write a book which he calls Where Do We Go From Here? And what he surmised is that at that moment, there were two options, right? That there was a space to move toward community or chaos. 52 years later, right? 53 years later, one word can fairly sort of characterize what we've experienced in the last year at least, right? Which is chaos. And so the challenge for us as part of our constant critical conversation is to think about how we in our spaces, whatever our sphere of influence is, if it's within a corporation or a community, a small business, a large business, a nonprofit, how do we organize ourselves around these difficult conversations to move those words into actions in a way that we build community and we steer clear of the chaos that has for too long characterized not only the national landscape, but the landscape here in New Jersey. I've been really heartened in the throes of this very painful moment, you know, this pandemic, the coronavirus pandemic, and the police brutality pandemic, and the structural racism pandemic. You know, we think a lot about how this moment, if there's a picture, it is that we're all standing on a foundation, right? And the foundation is cracked. And those are cracks of structural racism. And it's through those cracks that our communities are experiencing real earthquakes, right? And so the challenge for us then is, how do we move these conversations into action in a way that builds community in our community, in our places of employment, in the broader community, and at the broader societal level, in a way that fills in those cracks and helps to build a new foundation.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. And there are so many layers to it, just as you said, and thank you for recommending that book to our attendees today to participate in. You know, at the top of your comments, you made mention of advocating for truths. And I think that 2020 has been a revelation of a lot of truths. And as a coach, I'm constantly telling my coachees, you know, you have to get comfortable with the uncomfortable. And some of those truths are downright uncomfortable. And it's a period in time where we have to get comfortable with it. But having the tools to get us there is what's important. So thank you for sharing those insights.
Absolutely.
You know, we heard from our survey that 74% of respondents said employers should play a role in promoting racial equity. You know, Rena, do you believe DE&I efforts in the workplace need to go beyond what they've been in the past, especially in light of what's happening in 2020? And what do you think employees want to hear from employees? From their employers, I should say.
Yeah, no, great question, and absolutely agree. It's time to go above and beyond. You know, as I mentioned before, this is the time to innovate DE&I. It's not the time to remain silent. Organizations need to address what's occurring in the country, right? And your employees need to know your stance, your presence, and like Allison mentioned, they need to know that you care about them. Employees are your brand ambassadors on the front line. How they feel about equity, either it's race, gender, at the workplace, it will come out either consciously or unconsciously, good or bad. So it doesn't matter if your efforts are only impacting one employee or 1,000. Communication is crucial to foster inclusivity. And frankly, satisfied employees mean more productivity. According to Deloitte, diverse companies enjoy 2.3 times higher cash flow per employee. Gartner found that inclusive teams improve team performance up to 30% in high diversity environments. In a BCG study, diverse management teams had 19% increase in revenue compared to their less diverse counterparts. The facts are there. Stronger DE&I efforts will benefit not only an employee, but the organization in the long run and short run.
No, those are some very interesting stats and so very true. You know, we talked to a lot of organizations, and organizations have realized over the years how important it is to have diverse voices at the table. You know, we'd like to think that it's just a do-good feel, but you know, it is business, but it is the right thing to do. So very interesting stats there. Allison, let me ask you to add on a little bit there, because you too work for a large organization. You know, what are employees wanting from your employer?
You know, and I was going to chime in, as a matter of fact, Sheila. So thank you for
read your
asking
mind.
that. Exactly.
I read your mind.
Exactly. You know, I was just waiting for you to pause so I could jump in. And we held listening sessions. We held listening sessions for all of our employees. They were 90-minute sessions. They were facilitated by our Diversity Council members and extended invitees, shall I say, as facilitators. And the purpose was to really give them the opportunity to be heard, to have everyone around listen, to hear their stories, to hear their reactions to everything that's going on. And these were very compelling sessions. I mean, they were emotionally draining, but they were very appreciative that we took the time and we did that. Mm-hmm. They appreciated the fact that we took the time to give them a forum where they could really speak their truth and they could be heard, where in most instances, their truth is suppressed and they never let on how they're feeling. So some of the comments were similar to, I didn't know that's how my coworker felt, because they never talk about it. But this gave them that opportunity, and it was really very enlightening. So what do they want to hear? They want to hear more of this. They want more conversations like this. They want to continue this dialogue. It's not just a once and done type of situation. You have to continue this dialogue because it's forever changing. It's not static. And to gain understanding and get that collaboration going, you have to talk about it. And yes, it's awkward and it's uncomfortable. However, with tools, the proper resources, and education and training for those that will facilitate, it can be done. And it has been done, and we will continue to do that. And they're very appreciative of the fact that this is a commitment. We've made a pledge to our employees to do a variety of things. And that's one of the things that we will continue to do to continue that dialogue.
Great. Great. You know, Allison, and Rena, thank you for providing those insights on what employees are saying. You know, Allison, our poll showed that just over half of companies are speaking out in public about racial justice and the importance of racial equity. You know, that's probably more than ever, but it's barely a majority. Do you think speaking out will grow and continue as time goes on? And what do you say to those who want to speak but don't know how to get there?
You know, I would like to think that it will grow. You know, the eternal optimist in me says, yes, it will continue to grow. But let's not condemn those that are struggling to get there. You know, because you don't speak out doesn't mean you're not doing anything. You may not necessarily be making it public. And for those that are speaking out, I challenge those companies a year from now, what have you achieved? Where are you at? And where are you going? Because being vocal is one thing, but actually putting all of this into action is another. And so my jaded side is saying, I want to see what happens a year from now, 2 years from now. Is it still sustainable? Are you still just as committed, even more committed than what you are right now? And what have you achieved? And what were the gaps, and how did you address those gaps? And what's the outcome, and how are your employees feeling now? Those are very important components to all of this. So for those that speak out and they continue to, I applaud them, but I want to see what else they're going to do as we go a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, because this is nothing new. This is something that we've been experiencing for forever, for as long. I mean, I'm a child of the 60s, of the Civil Rights March. I know about that. I was a part of that. And so to see where we were versus where we are now and the upheaval that has taken place, it makes one question, you know, how far did we get? And to Ryan's point, Dr. King's book, yeah, what do we do from here? You know, that definitely begs the question. But on both sides of the fence, if people or companies are not speaking out, they may still be doing something. And actually, they may be doing more than those that are speaking out. So,
hey, Sheila, if I could just jump in for 1 second on that.
I was just about to ask you to jump in because you have the ear of so many companies. So we would love to hear some insights. Yes.
Yeah, I just want to say we've been speaking with executives on these issues. We just recently, in partnership with the African American Chamber of Commerce, stood up an executive roundtable. And you know, as I said earlier, there are some quietly, as has been recognized by Allison, who are coming into the game, and they're trying to learn the rules of the game. And this is going to be a slow and steady process, which I believe is sustainable. We've talked about this, yes. Right? Sheila, I believe it was you or it was someone earlier who said, actually, it might have been Allison that said, this is not a sprint. And this isn't just about checking boxes and going home, right? And so slow and steady is sustainable. And when we look at metrics and growing metrics, it will be slow and steady. However, that said, it has to be with intent and purpose. And so we cannot at all see impact from the things that we don't measure, right? And so we need some key metrics out there that we're looking forward to working on that could actually show that we're moving the needle. And then we need to keep the momentum in that. Because what I fear, I go back and Ryan, you know, you so compelled me. I'm ready to go buy that book now and be reminded to make sure I got my head in the right game. Seriously, right? That what happens is we get all charged up and then we get so easily, right? We all get so status quo. We see it after every major crisis. How do we ensure that we keep momentum, and then how do we keep some type of key metrics that keep moving the needle forward, and then holding people accountable, but not by guilting them, by actually showing them, as Rena said, you know, that there's value and return on investment for your workplace. You'll attract the most competitive and the best employees you can, because that's what they're looking for, mission-driven and sustainable companies, right? But to your supply chain and to your shareholders, I mean, these are real issues now that sit at the forefront of everything we do in business. And I just hope that we can keep momentum at this moment. And that's what I'm going to challenge all of us to do as leaders.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. Ryan, would you like to share some insights on this? Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. One, it's a great conversation. I'm often, this to Allison's point again, I'm 46, right? So I'm often challenged by the framing that this work takes time, right? Because it does, right? It takes time. But, you know, in this book 53 years ago, Dr. King asked the question, you know, how much time? I mean, how much time would one need to get to the whatever victory is? And so I think, you know, really for us, we got to be really concrete about an affirmative vision for what a victory looks like. And then to Michelle's point, the really concrete deliverables on how to get there and the time to get there. I think that the topic of this conversation, the title, Words Matter, is really important. But we've said a lot of words. You know, one of the powerful things about this moment is that almost every corporate executive in the country offered some statement about George Floyd's killing, right? And there were powerful words. And some, I saw them live, some were even moved to tears as they read the words. But on the other side of tears, we're in a space right now where it's hard to understate how painful this moment is. So I'm in Newark, I'm 6 blocks away. I live 6 blocks from Beth Israel Hospital, right? People are dying from the coronavirus. 700 people in Newark have passed away from a disease that preys on the underlying conditions found disproportionately in Black people. And we're in a moment where people are saying really proudly and profoundly and boldly, courageously, that Black lives matter, right? Black lives matter. And although that's an undeniable truth, that is a truth that's being contested everywhere in this country, including right here in New Jersey, where Black people confront some of the worst racial disparities in the country in every direction. I just want to share a couple of them because these keep me up late at night, right? So New Jersey has the highest Black to white adult and youth incarceration disparity rate, 12-to-1 for Black adults, 21-to-1 for Black youth, highest in the country, even though Black and white people commit most offenses at about the same rate. We have one of the most staggering racial wealth gaps. It's in New Jersey. The median net wealth for white families, $352,000, the highest net wealth of any family in the country. White folks in New Jersey, highest net wealth. But for Black families, it's $6,100. And for Latino families, it's $7,300. Staggering racial wealth gap, right? And there's a narrative that drives those racial disparities. Some folks will say, well, part of it is that it reflects individual failures, right? Black folks, Latino folks, allergic to wealth, given to crime, right? There is a narrative that drives an explanation, but the real one is that there are systems designed to produce those outcomes. And so for us, if we ever want to arrive in a different place, in our companies, in our communities, in our society, we gotta begin to attack those structural challenges. I heard a fantastic talk Trevor Noah gave as part of a Prudential talk, and he said, you know, the truth is that our hiring practices are shaped very sharply by just where we live and who we're with. He said, so I've been in lots of rooms with men lots of rooms, all men. And he said, I'd never seen in that space a man say, hey, where are all the women, right? Where are the women? Because it makes sense if you're a man and you're in a space with men that that's just how it is, right? Similarly, I don't know because I'm Black, but I imagine in all white spaces, right? I don't think what white folks often think about, hey, where are the Black women, the Latino women? And so the challenge for the companies, all of them at every size, is if your company is all white or overwhelmingly white, and you only have Black folks or people of color in kind of the outreach or the crisis management or those other spaces, but not the managerial positions, if your company doesn't have a way for people in the company to progress, to advance, that's a real challenge for you. I lead an organization that is majority women of color. This is a team of national talent. And that's very intentional on my part because the talent is out there. The question is, do we go and find it? Are we intentional about making words matter around racial diversity, around inclusivity, around making Black lives matter, really? And so part of our charge as truth tellers is have these very uncomfortable conversations that push companies beyond words mattering to those deeds matching the words. So that, to Allison's point, on the other side of the tiers, the proclamations, the statements, the press conferences, the ceremony, on the other side of that, on the other side of the tiers, there's real transformation that builds the kind of community that we've been talking about for at least 53 years, going back to Dr. King's book and before it.
Well, Ryan, stay right there for a moment. You know, can you define or describe what success looks like and how do we get there?
Yeah, I love that. So for me, you know, so we're having a conversation with the business community, right? Businesses, for obvious reasons, are driven, motivated by, very focused on the bottom line, right? Which is profits over losses. And we're in the throes of a pandemic, an international pandemic that have caused some businesses to shutter, right? I saw the impact on businesses of color, Black businesses in particular. One study said that 1/3 of them have closed and won't reopen. In July, the unemployment rate for Newark residents was 20% of the city, which, by the way, today is the percentage of Newark residents who have contracted the coronavirus. So we're like in this incredibly, incredibly painful moment. And I think it's precisely in painful moments like these that we have to have a very affirmative vision for what success looks like. And so one numerical aspiration can be that your company, right, wherever it is situated, should aspire to look racially like the community in which it's housed at all levels, entry-level positions to the CEO positions, the board, right? So it's a very crude analysis. I'm not talking about fixed numbers, but as a goal, like companies every year say, we hope to make this much money. The partners, I'm a lawyer, right? So partners in law firms say, I hope to bring home this portion of the total revenue, right? So just as we're intensely focused on the revenue, we should also be thinking about, so how do we build a staff that looks, in using diversity broadly, but racial diversity in particular, how do we build a staff that looks like the broader community? Start with the city in which we're housed. So if you're in Newark and you're Panasonic, for example, right? What does it mean for the Panasonic staff at all levels and its board to look like the broader city, Newark, in which it's housed, right? What does it mean for Horizon or the businesses that are a part of NJBIA? What does it mean for those to look like demographically, racially, ethnically, the community in which they're situated? Now that's gonna be a challenge. It's gonna be a humbling exercise, right? Initially, because there are gonna be some companies looking around and say, oh my gosh, we're overwhelmingly white and white men. And for some reason in 2020, we're just now becoming awakened to this reality. And we know the talent is out there. So how do we as a company, to Michelle's earlier point, how do we now begin to build metrics to move in the direction where we reflect the broader community, the broader country? You know, New Jersey is, the 2020 census shows that New Jersey is now 45% people of color. Incredible racial diversity. In the last 10 years, the Latino population, the South Asian population has grown tremendously. How do our companies look with respect to representation like that among the staff, among the employees at all levels, among the board? among the partners, among the CEOs? What is the composition of gender equity, women, right? We have to be very intentional about diversifying our companies broadly. Otherwise we'll talk more about, we'll offer more words. I'll say this last thing. We spent a lot of time thinking about legislative policy change. So we had been pushing the legislature to pass some real laws, for example, that would build accountability into policing, because it's been a very difficult moment, as we know, on the police side. And the legislature passed a bill making Juneteenth a state holiday, right? Juneteenth is all about the end of slavery and freedom and liberation, right? But it challenged me because I think it was too soon to pass a bill celebrating that kind of holiday when we have to deal with some of the underlying challenges that speak against the way that we've achieved the freedom that Juneteenth is all about. So I worry in this moment that we'll spend too much time on the words and the ceremony without doing some of the harder work to get to the underlying structures that have led us to this difficult moment in the first place.
Yeah. No, I appreciate those insights, and I'll ask your other fellow panelists. Yeah, Rena, if you wanted to.
Quickly wanted to jump in, and I think right to Ryan's point is organizations may feel that this movement is so large, so overwhelming, but to Ryan's point, you just need 3 to 5 goals. A goal can simply be taking a look at your talent and diversify it and seeing what your, what the world outside looks like to match it up to that, right? And you don't really need a large financial commitment. It's simply just finding the right resources, making sure accountability and commitment is there. And that's what it really comes down to. So to add that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Thank you for adding that, Rena. Did anyone else have a comment on that? I'm heading towards my final question.
Michelle?
But sure.
And I was just listening to what Ryan had been saying, and I was thinking about, what does success look like? I think before you can get to success, you first have to define what it looks like, whoever that might be. I'm not sure if you can hear me.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, okay. First define it. What does a company's vision look like as it relates to success? Mm-hmm. And then once you've done that, is that incongruent with what your employees are telling you? Mm-hmm. And if there is, that's your starting point. And that might require a tremendous amount of work to get to the end game, to that end state, because what your leaders may envision as successful, your employees may say, that's not anything what we want. That's not where we want to go. And once you've identified that gap, that's when you can begin to make that plan and then hold leadership accountable and then begin to measure success. So you can get to what success should look like from both the top down and the bottom up.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point, Allison. And my final question, I think, helps us to expand on this a little bit more in regard to what Ryan, Rena, and Allison just said. I'd like each one of you to kind of provide a final tip on how corporate change agents and diversity officers can seize this moment, sustain it into the future at their organizations, and to your point, Rena and Allison and Ryan, define what success for their organization looks like. How can they do that? What is your final tip to them for today? And we'll start with Allison.
Sure. For anyone that knows me, they probably think of my middle name as being tenacious. And I think that's really important in this space. You have to be tenacious. You can't give up. You can't become discouraged. You have to be intentional and focused about what it is that you're trying to achieve, and being steadfast, being thoughtful, being an influencer, being a multiplier. These are all skills to help you and to educate others and to bring them along the continuum as you continue this journey. Because once again, as I said before, it is a journey. It's not something that'll happen quickly. It happens over years. And you can see the evolution if you stick with it.
Thank you. Michelle?
Yeah, I want to continue on that spectrum of values, if you will, because I think it is so important how you come to the game, not just, coming to the game. And, at NJBIA, I immediately thought of two of our corporate values that we try our best to live every day. Because we're so big in advocacy and we take on difficult issues, one of our values is courage. Right. And so courage is, you're going to muster up the courage to go out there and stand for what you know is right, even in the face of adversity. That couldn't be, more apt to this discussion than anything else that we do. But along with that, another value we hold dear is integrity, that in doing it, we will always ensure reputation first. And so this comes back to ensuring that we are honest in our approach to this, that we don't just say but not do. And that whole thing, again, of being able to be held accountable is so important. And I say a lot of times passion is so important, right? You can't fake passion for something, and you can't pretend that you stand for something that you don't believe in your heart, because people will call you out on it. And so that integrity and that honesty and that transparency, I'll finish up with where you are on that spectrum I talked about before. Do not be embarrassed. If you're early on in the spectrum, have courage to know that you should be proud of yourself for being on the spectrum, and we're out there to help you through best practices amongst all your colleagues, be it executive or frontline, to help you to get there as an organization. And to that, Rena, as the co-chair of our diversity and inclusion committee, at NJBI, I want to thank her, and I'm going to toss it to her to talk about the great work that the committee is doing.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. And we started a D&I council last July, and every month we host a webinar on search important topics. So if your employees need to stay well-versed and, topics that you wouldn't even expect that fits into D&I, join us, and we're going to have a strong year next year as well, with great topics coming your way and great host. But yeah, so some final words. But thank you, Taft, for having me here today. And for me, I feel that this effort is continuous. This initiative, all these initiatives are continuous. You may fail, but pick up and see how to continue to improve yourself, right? Keep listening, learning, and leading change, not only for our employees, but for the world outside. And I'd like to leave you with this quote that really resonated with me from Michelle Obama. It starts with self-examination and listening to those whose lives are different from our own. It ends with justice, compassion, and empathy that manifest in our lives and on our streets.
Wonderful. Thank you. Brian?
Sure. Thanks again, Taff, for hosting such a fantastic conversation. I love Michelle's reference to sort of core values and picking out the value of courage. And I think the good thing is that every company, every organization is guided by values. And so I think particularly in this moment where there's so much activity, there's so much advocacy, there's so much focus on social and racial justice, that I think we have the opportunity to push really hard to encourage companies, for-profit and nonprofit companies, to really live up to the values that they hold dear and to make those words matter. I just offer one quick story that I think of this often. When I was in college, I was in a class where the professor asked us to bring, as a part of a short show and tell with us the following day, a thing of value. And I was paired up the following day with a young woman from a southern state, and we each had our thing of value. She reached into her backpack and she pulled hers out, and I was horrified by hers because I recognize this thing as the international, in my mind, the international symbol of hate, right? It was a Confederate flag. And she explained that this flag was precious to her and her family because it had been given down from the great-grandfather to the grandfather to the father, now to her. She brought it with her to college, and I was horrified by this flag, and it led us into a really honest conversation about race. And she said, Ryan, I like you. I like you. She said, I like you. And when I see you, I don't see you as a Black person. I just see you as Ryan. Now, here's the thing, right, about that. I knew her to be someone who had a car. She had a car, and I knew that she drove the car on and off campus. So I sort of walked her through. I wasn't yet a lawyer, but I was training to become one, right? So when you drive your car on and off campus, you go through stoplights, right? She said, of course I do, right? Okay, and if the light is yellow, you speed up. She said, I do, right? If it's green, you keep going. If it's red, you stop. She said, of course. She was annoyed by these questions, couldn't really figure out where they were going. And I said, see, so you have evidenced an ability to see color. You have. But you say when you see me, you don't see me as a Black person, because when you think of me as a Black person, you see that as a problem. And you said you like me. I don't particularly like you right now with your Confederate flag, right? But I understand that you like me and you don't want to see me as a problem. But what if you saw me in the way that I see me? I actually love being Black, and I don't see it as a problem. And I love for you to begin to see me in the way I see me, all of who I am, not just on some fictitious belief that you just don't see me as a Black person. And I would say to you, that was 25 years ago that conversation happened. And that was a transformative moment. I won't suggest to you all that we got to the best place in life, but we had a very difficult conversation. And those kinds of conversations are happening right now in our companies. And the challenge for us is to embrace those. And when having those, then you get the deeper conversations around, so what is it do you like, what the words we use? Like, I don't really know, like there's a comment about at risk or marginalized. Doesn't that diminish communities of color? So the beginning to get to those deeper conversations around words mattering is first having honest and uncomfortable conversations around words and race, and then moving to deeper conversations about structural racism and ultimately how do we combat it, starting in our communities, which is our corporate, our nonprofit sectors, our small businesses. Look, change has always started from the ground up wherever we are. It never begins in Washington, D.C. down. It always starts where we are. And that's the promise we have. That's the promise laid out in this book. Where do we go from here? Dr. King's last book. And I think that's the challenge for us at this very moment.
Thank you, Ryan. And thank you for your testimony, for your story. You know, I'm an avid believer and fan of storytelling. You know, it's the first thing we loved as children was hearing a story, and it's by the stories that we tell that information is shared and minds are changed. So thank you for that. I want to thank everyone on this panel, and I hope that all of you who are attending you were taking notes, and if you weren't able to take notes, a recording of this will be on our website, taftcommunications.com. So I encourage you to go back and listen to it, because there were a number of really profound things that were said that many of you as change agents and D&I professionals can take back to your organizations. A couple of things that I heard that always resonate with me is having a seat at the table. This is the time, right? For voices to be at the table, so that's important. Advocating for truth tellers, really powerful things there. We all have our truths to tell, and it's important to hear our employees and to hear from our employers about their truths. I heard several words that, of course, are so important and empowering in this time: courage, integrity, transparency, self-examination, justice, compassion, empathy, and then finally, transformative moments. I'm hopeful that today's webinar was a transformative moment for many of you who are listening, and for each one of us as we're sharing our information. So what I'd love to do with our last 10 minutes here is to turn to some of the questions that you, the attendees, are sending in for our panel. If you allow me one moment, I can look down at these questions. All righty. We have a first question here, and I'll pose the question. I won't recommend who should answer it. I'll allow you guys to figure out who you'd like to answer it. As employees, what can we do to keep the momentum going at our organizations? So this is kind of like the last question we just talked about. So, but this is a wonderful perspective, because they're saying as an employee, they're not in that change agent role, they're not in that leader role, but they're employees. How do they keep that going?
I could take that.
Wonderful.
I can just even share my personal side. I was an employee at Panasonic I just joined maybe a year and a half ago. This was a passion. This was an area that I knew there was areas I wanted to change and areas I wanted to influence. So I went to leadership. I went to those that I knew were the change makers already there, kept going in with my ideas. And, through that, I was able to completely revamp the women's leadership team there and regrow the way and modernize it, right? We're kind of slowly out of that Me Too movement, but we're kind of evolving into something different, right? It's more, how do we neutralize the gender gap? And I think as an employee, you have so much power and continue to feel empowered, and don't, it may feel uncomfortable. You may feel that you don't really have a place to say it, but keep bringing in new ideas. Joining today's, webinar, I think you're probably going to learn some new ideas to bring to the organization. This is the time where change is welcomed and organizations are looking at innovative ways to keep momentum. So speak up, bring those ideas.
That's great. Thank you. We have
just
another
like
question.
to add to,
Oh,
I would like
please,
to add
Ellen.
to that.
Please.
And Rena really embodied what I was going to say. Everyone is a change agent. Don't think that you're not. You all have the ability to affect change, and it can be incremental. It may not be widespread change, but it starts, and that's where the momentum begins to build. If you don't have an ERG at your place of employment, you could recommend, why don't we start one and build a case to support why you should have one. And you could be the leader, in fact, by virtue of just making the recommendation for that ERG. So incrementally, as you continue to make suggestions and you continue to offer suggestions, that's how it all begins. And there's a groundswell. You can influence others to do it. So never think that just you alone cannot have an impact, because you most certainly can. That's how it begins.
Yeah, no, that's a powerful insight, Allison. Thank you, Rena and Allison, for answering that question. And I hope that helped the attendee who submitted the question and everyone else to recognize that those who have the title, clearly it's their responsibility by title, but it's available for all of us to have a voice and to make change. So that's pretty powerful. So we have another question here. Can you suggest alternative language other than underprivileged, at-risk youth, or underserved populations, or other phrases and terms that may sound like microaggressions? Ryan, would you like to start off with the response for that one?
Sure. Yeah, I think that's a great question. It's actually consistent with our discussion here about. I think this was Allison's point earlier about, having an affirmative vision for success and a vision in which people are empowered. And so I think very often when we talk about inequality, right, we talk about people who face the greatest inequality sort of from a deficit perspective, right? So that something is wrong with them. Like the racial disparities I shared earlier are a function of individual failures, rather than acknowledging that there are systems at work, there are systemic challenges that create that inequality. It's not the people on the other side of the equality who are responsible for it. It's that there was an actual design. New Jersey has a staggering racial wealth gap because it was designed, right? There is an actual system designed. So I just offer this plug. My colleague, Andrea McChristian, wrote this report called Erasing New Jersey's Red Line. You can find this on our website, but it talks about sort of where New Jersey's racial wealth gap was created, where it was conceived, and how it's been manifest in today's numbers. So part of the challenge is when we talk about inequality, we talk about race, doing so that empowers people who confront those systems of oppression, not that blames them for them. So I do think a lot about, at risk. I mean, I don't know, I think I have a similar issue with it. I don't use at risk. I try not to use marginalized as often. I talk about the systems that are focused at people. So it's the system, it is the systemic challenges that we use the words to describe the challenge, not the person who's challenged. And then I think there's a growing sort of body of work around how people of color groups want to be considered. So in my own organization, we had this big debate about, so is it Latinx, is it Latina, or Latino? And so we leaned on people from the demographic to tell us what that would be. If it's Black, there are Black people who prefer straight Black, other folks prefer African American, right? So I think you have to give people agency to say how they want to be considered, but not from a deficit perspective, but really from one that tries to empower those groups on the other side of those very fierce systems of oppression.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Ryan, can I just ask, are there particular resources that maybe in follow-up we could post or we could share? This is an ongoing issue for everyone, whether you're a corporate leader or just someone who wants to say the right thing. I hear all the time, how do you ask someone about how they care to identify? And, across all the different spectrum of diversity that we speak of, and this whole program is about words matter. So maybe we can provide some tools. Maybe you have already on your website that you could share, or you could point us to where there are resources for people who are looking for the right words.
I see. Yeah, that's a great point, Michelle. I'll do that. I'll follow up with Sheila. I mean, you're seeing this happen really powerfully now with pronouns. How do people identify, right?
Exactly.
I mean, and I think that's powerful, right? Because to the question, it gives people agency to say how they identify, and then you are required to speak in that language, right? If you care to address them as they want to be seen. So I think that great question, and I'll follow with Sheila and Michelle on that point.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And the title of today's webinar is Words Matter, right? And I think that this question really brings to light that words matter, and what is an acceptable word for someone may not be for someone else, and how do we deal with that? How do we speak to the masses in a way that is communicating a truth, getting across as many people as possible? So the words matter. So yeah, I look forward to any information you can share that anyone who's on this session with us today can tap into to kind of help them navigate that road, because that is critical and important. So we're kind of running up against the clock, and I'm sure we could all continue to talk for hours about this. There's so much to be said, but I am so inspired by what I heard today from all of you. Kudos to all of you and your organizations with the things that you're doing, the changes that you're making, and the impact that you're having on individuals and organizations throughout New Jersey. Powerful. And one of the final questions that I was going to ask from one of our attendees was about how do you take this moment and turn it into a movement? And I think when you reflect back on everything that all of you have said today, there are so many things that can be done that will take this from a moment to a movement, because many of you are already doing that. And you've shared some of that wisdom today. So I thank you for all of that. I thank all of you who attended today's session. I want to thank our panelists, Allison Banks-Moore, Ryan Haygood, Rena Desai, and our partner and panelist, Michelle Sakurka. Thank you all for joining us today. Enlightening conversation, and I appreciate it all. Thank you so much.